Hey there. Are you looking at moving to Canada or have been thinking about moving to Canada for years and years but don't know what's the right visa to apply, what steps to take? If that's the case, you've landed in the right spot because in today's video, we're going to discuss how to immigrate to Canada in 2023. For details, watch the video till the end. Welcome back. My name is Hassan Shariq. I'm the owner and founder of Shariq Immigration, which is a leading immigration consulting firm based in Toronto, Canada. Through various social media platforms such as YouTube and Facebook, I upload videos on various aspects related to immigration, citizenship, student admissions. So if that's of interest to you, do consider subscribing. Coming back to the topic of today's video, which is how to immigrate to Canada in 2023. You must have read that every year Canada invites such a large number of immigrants from around the world, which is true. Canada is a country with a small population, about 37 million people, and the second largest country in terms of its land mass, one of the top 10 economies in the world. There is a skill shortage. In fact, the government of Canada has just recently announced that in the next 3 years, they're going to invite 1.5 million immigrants from around the world. You heard it right, 1.5 million immigrants from around the world. And you definitely want to be one of those. So to fulfill your dream, we will discuss various aspects of Canadian immigration in this video. In this video, we will first discuss what does it mean to immigrate to Canada. Then we'll have a look at the various types of visas that are there. Thirdly, we'll have a look at how to immigrate or what are the different immigration categories. And lastly, I'll give you a very quick brief on how to choose the right category of immigration for you. So let's have a look at all of them one by one. So first, let's have a look at what does it mean to immigrate to Canada. Now, for most people around the world, when they say immigrating to Canada, they actually mean moving to Canada and staying here in Canada permanently, which is partially true. But if you look at the legal definition, immigrating to Canada actually means that you can enter Canada, stay in Canada for a short term, for a long term, or for an indefinite time period, based on an authorization which is given to you by Government of Canada, the Department of Immigration in specific. Now, why do people immigrate to Canada? There are various possibilities. Somebody would want to just visit family. Somebody would want to do studies in Canada, somebody would want to establish a business in Canada, somebody would want to do a job in Canada, or somebody would want to permanently stay with their family or themselves permanently stay in Canada and become a Canadian citizen. So these are all different examples of immigrating to Canada. Let's now look at the various types of visas that are on offer. And this is something where a lot of people have a lot of confusions. One of the common confusions or queries that we get to see is that people say that I want to move to Canada on a family visa. And when we ask, what do you mean by a family visa? They say that I want to move to Canada along with my whole family. And that's what they think is a family visa. Let's put that aside and let's have a look at the various visa types that are there. So first up, we have the visitor visa. Visitor visa is where somebody is allowed to enter Canada for a short-term period. Usually it is 6 months from your entry into Canada. This particular visa is usually for a very specific reason, the reason of travel that you have for Canada. So it could be that you are somebody who wants to visit Canada as a tourist. So the purpose is travel. You come to Canada, you see a few places, you roam around Toronto, you roam around Montreal, you roam around Vancouver, and then you go back to your home country. Or you could be here to attend a family occasion. Maybe you have a brother or a cousin or a friend living in Canada and you would want to attend their marriage ceremony or meet with with your family member otherwise. You could be a businessman who wants to come to Canada, spend some days here in Canada, meet some vendors, and then go back. Or you could be a business executive who wants to attend a business conference or a small training. So these are all examples of visitor visas. Keep in mind, with a visitor visa, you only come in Canada for a short duration, as I mentioned earlier, not more than 6 months usually, and then you leave back. It could be multiple entry visas, it could be single entry visas. There are no work rights. It's not intended for you to stay permanently in Canada or for a long-term period. Then we have the study visas. Now this is again a very popular visa category for Canada. Canada is well known to be one of the top study destinations in the world. There is a large number of colleges, high schools, universities in Canada, which offer programs at various levels, and people from around the world would want to come to Canada, study. Some would want to stay back and some would want to go back to their home countries. If you wish to study in Canada and you're not a Canadian permanent resident or a citizen, regardless what your citizenship is, you are required to obtain a study permit. If your period of study or duration of study in Canada is for a period of more than 6 months. So for anybody who, say, for example, wants to do a 4-year bachelor's degree or would want to do a 2 years master's program in Canada, and they're not a Canadian permanent resident or citizen, they apply for what is called a study permit or a study visa. Next up, we have the work visa, which commonly is called a work permit. Now, within Canada, there is the policy that if employers in Canada are not able to find such skilled people that they require for their businesses, they can hire people from outside of Canada. And for this purpose, they have to apply for a document which is called the work permit. So anybody who gets a job offer by a Canadian employer for a specific duration, applies for a work permit, they move to Canada for that particular period of time. Say, for instance, if it is a 2 years employment, they work in Canada on the basis of a work permit. Once the work permit expires, they're required to go back. But as I said, that this is slightly long-term. You could be in Canada for 2 years, 3 years, or even more, depending on the employment contract. After this, we have the permanent resident visas. Now, these are visa categories where somebody is granted the right to enter Canada and then remain in Canada indefinitely as long as they meet certain residency obligations. This is what a lot of people are looking at obtaining when they mean immigrating to Canada. And then we have what is the family visas. Now, family visas can be one of the visas that I already mentioned, like a permanent resident visa or a temporary visa. A family visa doesn't really mean that you move to Canada along with your family, and that's why it's called a family visa. So these are the different types of visas that Canada offers. Now let's have a look at how to immigrate to Canada, the various streams or categories that are available for aspirants like you. So the first and the most popular are the skilled migrant streams or the skilled immigration categories. These are programs which are offered by the federal government or the provincial governments. Canada has 13 provinces and territories, and each of the province and territory has its own immigration offerings as well. Federal government has various programs as well. This is where they attract and invite skilled professionals from around the world who are within a certain age range, usually people who are less than 40 years of age, I would say, who have high educational qualifications, who have work experience in specific fields, good language ability, who can easily come to Canada and become active part of Canadian workforce and contribute towards the economic development of Canada. Such individuals from around the world are invited for permanent resident visas. Usually the way it works is that each of the programs, be it a federal or a provincial nomination program, they have a point-based system where you are granted points for your age, education, length of work experience, and some other factors. And based on this, they attract the program, the specific program attracts the top applicants within the applicant pool. Once somebody is within that top of that particular pool, they're invited to submit their application. Once the application is approved, they're invited to come to Canada along with their families, stay in Canada as permanent residents, and after a few years, they apply for citizenship. So this is called the skilled migrant category, which is very popular. Some of the examples, express entry and the provincial nomination programs like the Saskatchewan Immigrant Nominee Program, the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, the Alberta Tech Program. There are certain regional programs as well, the RNIP, AIPP. So this is one big category. After this, there is the option of immigrating to Canada through study. So if you move to Canada for the purpose of study, and you complete studies in Canada, depending on the duration of your study and the level of education, you are allowed to stay back in Canada on what is called as the postgraduate work permit. Now, within this postgraduate work permit duration, you're allowed to work anywhere in Canada. And say, for instance, you complete a degree in Canada and then you work for a year or two. This helps you become eligible for various permanent resident visa categories, which I mentioned earlier. And because you have Canadian education, you have Canadian work experience, you have added advantage because there are some additional PR categories that are open to people with Canadian education and Canadian experience only. So you have a greater chance of immigrating to Canada after completion of your study. Then we have the worker category, in which you can immigrate to Canada through a work permit stream. So if you're able to obtain a job offer from a Canadian employer and then move to Canada on a Canadian work permit, you work in Canada for maybe a year or 2 years. This makes you eligible for various PR streams where, as I mentioned earlier, for the study permit stream, people who come to Canada on a work permit stream have the additional benefit of gaining additional points for Canadian work experience, and based on that, they have some categories of PR visas which are just specifically for them, or even if they apply for the general categories such as express entry or various provincial nomination programs, because of the Canadian work experience that they have, they get additional points. So you could move to Canada first on a work permit, on a work visa. After say about 1 to 2 years or 3 years of work experience, you will have the opportunity to apply for a permanent resident visa and become a permanent resident of Canada. Then we have the option of family class immigration. Now, in Canada, if you are a Canadian permanent resident or a Canadian citizen, and you, say for instance, marry somebody who's outside of Canada, you can sponsor your spouse. This is one example or one kind of family immigration. So say for instance, you are yourself a Canadian permanent resident or a citizen who's of, say, maybe Indian origin, or you originally belong from Philippines, and then you get married to somebody from your home country or country of origin. You will sponsor that person to come to Canada as a permanent resident. This is one example of family-based immigration. Also, for Canadian permanent residents and citizens who are in Canada and their parents are elsewhere, there are certain options where they can invite their parents on a temporary visa, which is a super visa, or if they fulfill certain requirements, they can invite their parents for a permanent resident visa as well. So these are family class immigrations wherein you, because of your status in Canada, can invite eligible family members to Canada for various immigration streams. Then there is the option of immigrating to Canada through business. Now this is also a very popular category, although the requirements are very high. Canada is one of the most stable economies around the world. So a lot of people would want to invest in Canada, establish a business, and use that as a pathway towards immigration. There are various streams. There are programs by federal government. There are programs by provincial governments. Each program has its own requirements. But the general concept is that you have to invest in Canada in an active business, and then based on that business, by running that business for a year or so, you become eligible. First, you move to Canada on a business work permit, and then based on that business, you become eligible for permanent residency along with your family. So lastly, we have the refugee category. Canada has a lot of focus on human rights and helping people in need around the world. So if there are countries where there is impact of war, other such issues, Canada has various programs where people who face, say, persecution, or people who face hardship because of war, major natural calamities, Canada allows such people to come to Canada as refugees and make Canada as their permanent home. There are certain programs which are specific to certain countries and regions as a need arises. And then there are programs which are open for people from anywhere in the world as long as they meet certain requirements, a specific definition of being a refugee as mandated by the Canadian Immigration Department and the United Nations Human Rights Commission. Now let's have a look at how to choose the right immigration category for yourself. Now this is $1 million question, and very honestly, it's very difficult for me to summarize this and give you the right solution for this within a few minutes, but you need to keep a few things in mind. First, skilled migrant category. Only people who have few years of work experience in their occupation, have high levels of education which is relevant to their profession, who can score well on an English or a French language test, should be considering skilled migration options. And also for most of its programs, most of the categories under the skilled migration category, it is usually focused on people who are of a young age, for the primary reason that such people, once they move to Canada, they will be able to contribute for a longer time period towards the economic development and well-being of Canada. So usually people who are, say, between the age ranges of 25 to about 40 are eligible for these programs. I get to be asked by a lot of fresh graduates if they can apply for skilled migrant categories. The answer usually will be no, for the reason that unless you worked in your field for a few years, you are not considered as a skilled professional in that field, even though you've just completed a professional degree as well. For those who might miss out on the skilled migrant category, they need to consider the other options. So say for instance, you only have a high school degree, or you only have a bachelor's degree, and maybe you don't have the required years of work experience, or you have a lot of work experience and you're already touching an age which puts you at a disadvantage for a skilled migrant category. In that case, you could consider applying to Canada through a study route where you study in Canada, and once you complete your studies, you are first allowed to stay back in Canada, work in Canada, gain those points, gain the points for education, and then apply for your permanent residency. Alternatively, if you are somebody who's established a business somewhere in the world, or who's already worked at senior management positions and you have some capital with you, a good option is to establish a business in Canada. It could be a small business, it could be a large business, it could be anywhere in Canada. And based on that business, you will be entitled to work in Canada. Initially, it might be on a work permit, and then later on that can make you eligible for permanent residency in Canada. So that's all on the topic of how to immigrate to Canada in 2023. Very honestly speaking, in this short time frame, it's very difficult to talk in detail about all the different visa types or all the different immigration categories that are there. What I will be doing is that in coming days or weeks, you will be able to see more videos which will be very program or visa specific, so that you can get to know more about each of them. I would highly recommend that if you're interested, and if you watch the video till this time, you're definitely interested in Canadian immigration, mention the program or the visa category that you're most interested in, and with what comments I get, I will be able to make the decision as to which topics should I be talking about first. So do comment, and if you like the video, do like and support the channel as well. I'll soon be back with another video on a topic related to immigration, citizenship, and student admissions. Till that time, take care. Bye-bye.